Alien Showdown, the day the Old West stood still, from 2013, or how I know it at least is Alien Predator War, because this is the German version and German title, and that's how I've got it on Blu-ray. But this is a movie from 2013, and it's a kind of science fiction Old West story. The Cowboys and Aliens movie had come out in 2011, so I'm assuming this is kind of a low budget mockbuster, so to speak, of that one. So this is directed by Rene Perez, who I've done a good few movies of, and I actually quite like Rene Perez's movies, although they are, generally speaking, not all that good. But it's one of those kind of guys, I quite like his style of direction, and his movies are utter trash, but I still kind of quite like them, for the most part, at least. He's probably best known for the Playing with Dolls kind of slasher series, but he's done a lot of kind of science fiction, action, and he's probably known more recently, I would say, maybe for very pro-right-wing movies in response to, I would suggest, maybe the kind of the more mainstream left-wing stuff coming out of Hollywood, but he does a lot of like very conservative movies, should we say. Anyway, let's talk about this one. So this one stars Robert Amstler, who is an Austrian actor who you may have seen in a couple of his Rene Perez movies. And as well as being kind of obviously a kind of mockbuster to the Aliens and Cowboys movie, Cowboys and Aliens, it's clearly influenced by Predator. Let's see, we've got an Austrian muscle man facing off in the woods against a technologically advanced alien predator with a armor and laser weapons and a mandible-like face. Yeah, it's kind of obvious to see here. Anyway, before we get into anything else, what is the story, I hear you saying? Well, let me tell you. This actually has two storylines in it. One set in the Old West in the kind of, I think it's the late 19th century, and one in modern times. The A storyline is the Old West one. And here we have an outlaw played by Robert Amstler, who is kind of on the run from a bunch of bounty hunters, and just at the same time, there happens to be some spacecraft that kind of crash lands in this area. And there are two aliens. One is kind of like your traditional style grey alien who is kind of friendly, but he's injured, and he kind of like effectively gives our outlaw character a mission. The other is a brute predator-like killer who's seeking food and water and you know, has a kind of a mission, so to speak. So it's up to our outlaw character to try and stop this alien menace from alerting other aliens to the Earth's presence, but also at the same time evading bounty hunters that are kind of after him. Concurrently, we have our modern storyline, which is about these kind of scientists looking at artifacts that are left over from the Old West conflict and trying to figure out what's kind of going on. Now, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss. I kind of like Rene Perez movies, but I am good enough to say there's certainly some critical flaws here. But let me just talk about what I do like. One of the things I like about the Perez movies is he has a somewhat distinctive visual style. All of his films, or at least the vast majority, seem to take place in the same area, the same wooded area. And he has this style of shooting films in very kind of like bright sunlight. So his movies are always extraordinarily well lit with kind of natural light, but always give this kind of like real crisp feel to them. And they really make use of this great environment. It's not in this one, but he also spends a lot of time in this kind of factory, which I'm assuming he has access to. But yeah, I think his films always look pretty good. They've always got beautiful women in it. There's always kind of loads of action. You know, you've always got quite fun kind of like costumes, and you have in this one as well. Yes, it looks more or less like a Predator, but nonetheless, it's a lower budget movie. I'm a little bit forgiving with kind of like VFX and lower budget movie. We have two distinct aliens here. We've got a variety of kind of like you know, lower budget kind of VFX. We've got different kind of, you know, Old West shootouts. There's an Old West town at the beginning. So I gotta say, you know, there is some kind of like fun stuff here to kind of enjoy. If you like a kind of like a movie where you can turn your brain off, this may be a movie for you, because there's not a lot of dialogue in this movie, and it's just kind of people running around on screen in the woods, shooting at each other, or looking at women getting undressed. So if that sounds like fun times, you just want to put it on and kind of, you know, do something whilst that movie's on, that type of thing, this is probably a good film. If you want to sit down and really get invested in an in-depth storyline, maybe not this one. I'm just saying. But if you just want to put on that in the background, you're doing some work, and you'll look up occasionally, it's kind of a good film for that. Now that might sound like a backhanded compliment, and it is, but it is what it is. You know, you take what you can get. There are some good ideas, I suppose, here. The kind of the concept of having two timelines is interesting, and the modern timeline is more or less but just like a exposition for what's kind of happening in the kind of the Old West, because there's not a lot of dialogue in those sequences. I'd assume because Amstler is an Austrian actor and I don't think has the best grasp of the English language. But it's an interesting concept, you know, like they're kind of like figuring out the remains of kind of tech left behind and stuff like that, which I thought was an interesting idea here. So, you know, there is a couple of kind of fun concepts here at least, but let's talk about what doesn't work. I mean, this is a basic film. This is like a bare bones plot if you've ever seen one. I mean, it is just people running around in the woods. You've got the alien predator, or whatever you want to call him, sort of like just chomping around the woods, killing whatever he comes across, without seemingly like just wandering around really without any kind of real purpose. With like some silly effects where there's one thing where he can seemingly replicate different weapons. It's a little bit silly. And yeah, he looks more or less like a predator. You know, there's not really much deviation here. Our kind of hero has no characterization whatsoever. Again, I think it's because there's a language barrier here, but you know, nonetheless, he's just this like blank void of a kind of a character that, you know, we hear in none saying, oh, he's a good guy really, but that's all you get. That is all you get. So there's not a lot of plot here. One thing I critique Perez's movies in general, certainly that involves gunplay, not so much the slasher films, but his action sequences are not all that well shot. Now this is an earlier movie from him, but a lot of the time he's kind of, whenever there's a shootout scene, it's more or less people standing in like the open spaces, just like statically shooting at someone else doing exactly the same thing, and it's like, it's really unexciting action sequences. And even with a monster alien with a big sort of like chain gun, laser gun, it's really undynamic kind of action sequences. And then we have to talk about the kind of the sort of the modern storyline, which really has no real bearing. I mean, it could have not been there and have a bit more involved in the kind of the A storyline. Now, I suspect what's probably happened here is the kind of the Old West stuff has been shot, and then they've needed more scenes and like to kind of like fill it out, to kind of extend the running time, but also give it a little bit more context to story. So that's what I suspect has happened here. That's my speculation, but you know, it doesn't really need it. To be honest, it doesn't add anything to the story. It doesn't really go anywhere, especially. There are some technical elements, despite the fact I think Randy Perez has quite a good eye for cinematography. But some of the kind of, like I've said, some of his direction is a little poor in regards to, as I say, asking what his actors to do, and certainly in the action scenes. But there's also some kind of like very fake sounding sort of like audio effects and stuff, people being kind of like ADR'd in quite a poor way. So it's a real kind of like bit of a nothing burger, to be honest, this movie. You know, there's better Randy Perez movies, if I'm honest. This one doesn't really offer anything that you haven't seen before, even from Randy Perez's back catalogue. It doesn't really have any type of distinguishing features on it, really. So overall, despite me kind of quite liking this director, and he's somewhat of a guilty pleasure, if I'm looking at this movie objectively and critically, it's a 3 out of 10. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. It's not a good movie. Some good ideas, looks nice, great when you want to kind of like work and watch a film at the same time. But 3 out of 10 is really the best I can do. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do let me know, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time.